Welcome to the Wig and Pen Club, brought to you by SPUC. Joining me today are two brave pro-life advocates, Louise and Margaret, where we'll discuss topics such as the new buffer zone implemented in Scotland and also coming into England. And then we'll also discuss topics around the cultural myths surrounding abortion and also the introduction possibly of assisted suicide. So yeah, thank you guys for joining me in studio today.
Thank you for having us.
It's great, I'm excited for this. First up then, I just want to chat really about our demonstration outside Parliament in Edinburgh recently. SPUC has been working hard to stop the implementation of buffer zones, but how big of a threat now is it to Scotland since this has been introduced?
Well, it's the law now. It's the law now in Scotland, and it is the law in England, but it's not actually being carried out yet. It will be carried out from Halloween this year. So it is the law. It's the lay of the land. It's pretty evident that regular pro-life vigil activity would constitute a breach in the law. So if vigils as we know them were to happen outside of facilities that provide abortion, those people would be in breach of the law and would be subject to quite significant fines. Nobody's yet been arrested that we know of, but that is the case now that they could be. And I think this is a major, major threat to fundamental freedoms. And the fact that throughout the course of the debate, there was this refusal to recognize what a threat this was to fundamental freedoms, not just for pro-life people, but generally. There was such a blindness to all of that, which I just can't really fathom. It seems like this issue people want to treat as separate from everything else and as if different rules apply. And to be pro-life is seen as so heinous. And I find it to be really disturbing that more people don't recognize how harmful it is.
Yeah, I agree with you, Margaret. And Louise, when people say that they see pro-life vigils portrayed in the media, how different is it in real life?
Very different. Like, I think we see that across the board with with pro-life stuff in general. Like, what you see in the media is not how pro-life people are. And if you were to go down there, it is prayerful, it is peaceful. All this sort of harassment of women isn't actually happening. But obviously when stuff like that goes in the media, the population then just thinks that's how pro-life people behave. And sort of when we've done things like Project Truth on the street and we talk to people, they come into the conversation with an idea of what they think a pro-lifer is. And quite often they'll say to me, actually, this has been a really good conversation, because they're expecting something different because of what they've seen in the media. And that's not how pro-life people are, especially those ones, they're pretty harmless out there praying and things like that. So it's just
someone's granny.
It's really, really different. And that's what annoys me so much, because it's all this harassment of women and things. It's just absolutely not happening,
It can be next to impossible to break those media narratives because people have been hit over the head with them time and time again. And so they think, well, this is what the headlines are saying, so it must be true. But there have been no prosecutions for intimidation or harassment outside of any abortion facility in Scotland. And so it's not happening, but people are being told it's happening and they believe what they're being told, and therefore they believe action needs to be taken. But this action is so disproportionate. And as I say, it really infringes on those fundamental freedoms of religion, speech, assembly, and it's a very dangerous precedent to set. I think it's really important to be clear about the fact that this has so little to do with protecting women. I think some people who are bringing forward the legislation believe they're protecting women. But I think for a lot of people, it has to do with the fact that the pro-life position, they want the pro-life position in the public square to be unspeakable. And this is just one way to get there. They don't want people to be able to speak about this. Right. They don't want people to be able to question abortion publicly. They don't want to call any of that into the public conversation. And so this is just one step further in stepping all of that back and pushing pro-life people further into this unacceptable space. And I think we need to now be very conscious about how we come back at that. Because, it is the law now that these pro-life vigils can't happen. So what are we going to do instead to make sure that the pro-life voice gets spoken in the public square and that people are still exposed to it? I think Project Truth is a really good example. of bringing the pro-life message out to the streets. I think our demonstration outside Holyrood, they said, come to the Parliament instead of coming to the abortion providers. Fine, let's do it. We'll be there. But just to continue to have that conversation in the public space, because we can't let them silence it. Because ultimately, I think that is some people's goal.
But ultimately as well, though, it's actually, it's highlighting a lack of support already available as well. So like even taking pro-life out of it, it's the lack of support for the women, I think, as well. And when often people go in to these places, they're not offered these different options. So that's basically in the first place why pro-life people have to be outside, because if somebody, maybe they are a bit more undecided or whatever, and they're maybe looking for another option, but there is no other option when you get in there, by and large. So it's highlighting this bigger issue. How are we now going to deal with that,
And I think that's a really important point, because in this prevailing media narrative about pro-life vigils and what happens at abortion providers, they kind of portray women in two ways. So on the one side, every woman walking into an abortion provider knows and is self-assured in that decision, right? That's what they want us to believe. Everybody is walking in there totally confident in their decision. But also, they're vulnerable to people questioning that decision, which is why pro-life vigils are seen as so abominable. But those aren't the same person. The person who is confident in their decision shouldn't also then be vulnerable to that kind of questioning. And so what's really happening here? And I think we know anecdotally, and we know from our experience, that for a huge number of women, they aren't sure when they're walking through those doors, and they still have an ambivalence and an indecision and turmoil about it. And I won't say that's true for everyone, but that's certainly true for some people. And as we say, they walk through the doors and they aren't offered any other options.
Scandalous.
And this is now further denying those options to them in a way that is deeply disturbing.
And simply that, you're simply offering them another solution instead of killing their unborn baby. Nobody is judging them. SPUC would condone any behaviour of screaming or shouting at a woman entering a clinic. None of us here would want that for any woman.
Rugby tackle.
None of us would encourage any pro-life person to do that outside an abortion centre. But simply standing there with a sign saying, "Are you pregnant and worried? We have help." That shouldn't be seen as dangerous or intimidating or harassing women. And again, the simple Google search will show you that there has been no prosecution, as Margaret has said. I just wish people would really wake up to that and not be so quick to believe the likes of the media outlets that are portraying such vile lies. But that kind of touches on, I suppose, pro-life and women rights and pro-life feminism. Louise, what are your thoughts on that?
I think Margaret's better.
I don't know. I think one of the things that I think is really relevant to the buffer zones conversation too is this idea that pro-life people, particularly women in a pro-life space, and women who have experiences of abortion in any way, are kind of on a Venn diagram, they're two circles that don't touch. And that's just not true. And many people come to this work having deeply personal experiences, and that being a source of conviction for them. And that was one of the things in the buffer zones conversation that particularly frustrated me, this sense that I know that there were women who participated in the conversation on a political level who had abortions and participated in pro-life vigils, and yet their voice isn't reflected anywhere in the legislation. And it's people like that, there's one acceptable view for women, and it's to be quote unquote pro-choice. And if you don't hold that position, then, well, you're betraying women, right? That's this narrative, which is so anti-woman, right? Women are not a monolith. We don't think just one thing. So even notwithstanding the harm that I certainly believe abortion does to women, even if it was just having a diversity of opinions, of course we should be able to have a diversity of opinions. But for some reason, women in the pro-life space aren't given any space to talk on the issue, and suddenly they're almost treated as non-women because their opinion doesn't fit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really problematic. And I think a lot of people, miss that cognitive dissonance in the conversation about women's rights.
Yeah. And especially, I think, the topic of abortion in general, people miss so much. It's just like, it's so difficult. I've tried to understand, you know, like, because I can have quite a logical mind and things like that, so I try and think about things and try and work things out, the understanding, and a lot of, again, with Project Truth and stuff like that, is understanding how the person you're talking to, you know, how did they come to that decision, how did they feel that and stuff. But there's just so much that for some reason, you know, it's logic, and then you get to a point and then it's all of a sudden anything goes, and that happens with abortion, but like it doesn't happen in a lot of other places. So it's just,
From your experience then, is abortion safe and healthy for women?
I think we've seen that it's not. Like, I think you need to understand what a woman's going through when she's in that situation, because there's a whole host of reasons where she can get to a point where she is considering abortion for what reason, right? We know that most of those situations involve some sort of pressure or coercion. So I think we need a better understanding as a society how women got to that point and what's going on. Often, like, if they have the abortion, it doesn't actually fix what's going on round about that decision. So we need a better understanding, and all that does, if she is undecided in any way, that kind of heightens the risk of being damaged in some way afterwards and really struggling for, you know, that, and many women do struggle with that to the ends of their lives. So I think it's obviously damaging for the baby, but I think women and society in general are, you know, feeling the hit of that as well.
And there's this weird thing that I think happens in the medical space when it comes to women and abortion, where women are not told the truth or not told the whole truth about what that experience is going to be for them. And so Fiorella Nash, who has written on these topics a lot, talks a lot about this, the infantilization of women through the process of abortion. They're treated like children who can't handle the truth. So you're told, oh, it will be a gentle suction, or it'll be, you know, just like a light period, some cramping, and it's all these euphemistic words. And you can look at places like Mumsnet to find stories of women who their experience of abortion was much more physically and emotionally traumatic than that, and they weren't prepared for it because people were supposedly protecting them from it, but you know, ultimately not giving people information about a procedure like that's not helping them. That's actually putting them at much more significant risk, especially in a world where pills by post-abortion is so common. So women are undergoing this at home by themselves, and they have no idea what normal looks like. And so, I mean, notwithstanding, you know, the reality of what their unborn child is and who their unborn child is and their relationship to that child, that's obviously kept from them. But then the actual physical nature of the procedure is often kept from them. And so women are just lied to throughout. And so they're making this decision with bad information, often under a great deal of pressure, often feeling as though their livelihood, home, relationship are at risk and hinge on this decision. And that's not where good informed consent comes from. I mean, we've got pretty strict informed consent laws in this country. And all of those things impact a person's informed consent. Women should not be undergoing these procedures while under those kinds of pressures with bad information. And yet they are every day. And then they're suffering the consequences of that. And the only people we have to blame for that are the system, right? Ourselves. The systems we've put in place in the healthcare system, the laws we've put in place, all of this is putting women at risk, women and their babies at risk constantly in a way that really somebody has to answer for.
They should answer for it. And Louise, in your experience, can you tell us, I suppose, any horror stories of the DIY abortions from women you maybe chatted to, or the reality of what it is? Because some people just think, oh, it's just a popping a pill at home in my house. You know, self-care moments, you know, my teddy bears take away, not, you know, it's real, like, cozy night in, like that's what's been sold online on TikTok and on young women's accounts. Like there's a self-care thing to do. From your experience, how detrimental is the DIY
not kind
abortion
of
pill?
honing in on any sort of individual, but like
Yeah.
sort of collectively, you know, some of the stories that you hear have been really bad, and I guess it is concerning as well, because a lot of women, after with any traumatic experience, when you're brought back to the place of the experience, like that becomes a trigger for some people, and you know, smells and whatever. So if that's happening in people's homes, then I can imagine in time to come what we'll find is that people just find even like the bathroom or the bedroom or whatever, wherever it happened, is going to become a place of trauma for them and a trigger. So does that mean that we're just going to have a lot more anxiety with people living in their own homes and
as well.
you know, where does that take us from there? Are they going to need to move out and stuff? Because a lot of people revisiting maybe a hospital, if it took place in the hospital, then gets, you know, they get that trigger.
Yeah.
So things like that, even, you know, on top of all the stuff you just mentioned there, you know, it's never good. So that is a worry.
You want to know another aspect of that really bothered me during the initial pills by post conversation. Even when we were looking at just home use of misoprostol, which is the second abortion medication here in Scotland, so years ago. You have all these legislators, and it eventually went through the courts, so judges as well, talking about homes as, you know, a comfortable and safe place. And I just thought that was actually quite a privileged thing for these people to be saying. You know, these people are of a particular socioeconomic class, education level, whatever else, to be where they are. And who are they to say that because not everybody's home is safe and not everybody's home is comfortable. And there's going to be a lot of people who are hiding the fact that they're having an abortion from people in their home. And there's going to be a lot of people who are at risk in their own home. And we're just abandoning women to it. You know, they don't have any medical oversight of the procedure. They get sort of one phone call and the stuff gets sent to them with a list of instructions, and they can maybe call up after for the help they need. But most of the time, my understanding is they just get told to go to A&E. And so it's this sense of, well, actually, home is already not safe and comfortable for everybody. And this is where we're asking women to go through this process. And all the ramifications that come with that, and what they might see and what they might experience. I just think it is another example of people wanting to whitewash the abortion experience from the perspective of legislators and healthcare providers, so they don't have to see so much of the abortion, and putting all of the gravity and all of the weight of it onto the woman herself. And they just get to wipe their hands and walk away from it in a nice, clean, clinical way. And I think it's another way that we've really failed women, that we've put the entire onus on them through the whole process. And the other thing of pills by post, which I think we have to be honest about, is that there's also bad actors who will take advantage of the system. I mean, and a woman's already been charged in the UK. So there was a man who was in a relationship, and he was having an affair with a woman called Georgia. And he had tried to get a bunch of his female friends. His partner was pregnant, and he had tried to get a bunch of his female friends to buy or get abortion pills through pills by post. And eventually Georgia did it for him. And he intended to drug his pregnant girlfriend with them without her consent. And these are the ways in which the system is open to abuse, in a way that it's not all about a woman's choice, right? And this could be happening, you know, women could be at risk of this, it being dropped in their cup of tea or whatever else, although that's not how all the pills are taken. But I mean, I don't think this,
Speaking
thank
of
God,
tea,
I will
even
say,
got a cup of tea.
I know,
It's an
I will
empty
say,
mug, guys.
thank God this woman found the pills under her bed before he had a chance to give them to her. So she and her baby are fine. But I mean, these are the kinds of risks that we're exposing people to. And so it's very important that we talk about the reality of what this looks like, and the ways in which we have really put women at risk in an attempt to normalize abortion in any and all circumstances.
Yeah, it's seen from the pro-abortion side as a sign of liberation as women to be the direct killer of your unborn baby, especially when you're taking the pills at home. There's no doctor now involved. You are the direct killer of your unborn baby. And I think I'm nearly 4 years now at SPUC, but I think one of the moments that hit me the most and made me quite upset actually was hearing that women are traumatized when they find the body parts of their baby when they pass at home. I remember I think this is maybe the first time I cried in front of John, trying to tell my boss the reality of what women are facing. And I think more people need to hear those stories, and they need to hear that there's multiple women who are so shocked and stunned that they're putting the baby's body parts in their freezer.
Interestingly, now BPAS, the abortion provider, warn women going through pills by post. I hadn't always seen it, but it is now true that they warn women that they might see their unborn baby. Not only that, but they might see signs of life.
Wow. Wow. So this is on BPAS's it's a website? Go look for yourselves, guys.
They've got a consent video for DIY, for home abortion.
Wow, a consent video.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, Louise? on that?
Oh yes, Margaret flagged that up to me before and showed me the stuff, and I was just like, it's just maddening, really, with that kind of stuff when you see it. So
on the other side of the battle now to protect human life, we now see a serious attempt to legalise assisted suicide here in the UK, as we have a lot of other groups trying to attack the dignity of life. Why has assisted suicide no place in the UK?
Oh, you look at other countries. So we had a conference a couple of weeks ago.
You're almost like getting mad at me for asking. Well, look at other countries. I'm like, I know. I'm on your side.
I get too excited.
Let off, Steve.
No, what I was going to say, this is something it's come back time and time again in the UK, and has kind of not got anywhere in those stages, but
yeah,
it's a higher risk now. We're seeing other countries that's been brought in. SPUC had a conference a couple of weeks ago, as you know, and we had a speaker over from Canada, and he was basically just talking about, because it's been, I don't know how many years has it been in Canada? It's been a while now. And they just see, obviously, when it got brought in, it's for these little reasons, the same that they're sort of saying for the UK, and then that leaves the door open. Once you get the okay for that, it leaves the door open to then extend it for other reasons. And he was saying there's people like veterans and stuff like that aren't getting the care that they need, and they've been offered basically assisted suicide instead of giving them. So he was talking about one woman who needed a stair lift in the house, and there's groups and places that should be actually helping with that, and she would have to get herself up the stairs, like just kind of bumping up one at a time, and she was due to get this. So basically they were willing to pay for assisted dying but not pay for the stair lift. And she was in a really bad place at the time, so actually she had accepted to go ahead with that, and she was in a really bad place, really depressed and things, and she got help from good places, and they actually offered to pay for her stair lift as well, but in a better headspace. She was like, you know what, actually I'm owed it from these people, so I want to get it off of these people. So it's like stories like that, and then things like diabetes and stuff like that. We're seeing stuff, mental health issues. I mean, where is the line? Because when it's brought in, we're told there is a line, but if you look at some other countries, where is the line?
Well, I mean, and I know as part of the legislation in Scotland, they've had discussions around requiring, if assisted suicide were to be made legal, requiring it to be presented as a treatment option if you qualify, which on the surface seems just like, part of healthcare policy, right? But it's actually very insidious. So that would mean anybody who qualifies has to be told at any point when you're discussing treatment options that assisted suicide was an option. So, oh, you have cancer, you could go through this treatment, that treatment, or we could help you kill yourself. And you have to remember that would be coming up at every point of discussion when it comes to treatment options. And as you point out in the case of the veteran, but it would be true in any case of chronic illness, especially if chronic pain is involved, terminal illness, that is all going to come with emotional highs and lows. And not just emotional highs and lows, but real anxiety and real depression. And you would hate for somebody in a low moment to seek something like that out, because it's just always been raised to them through the course of the process, and you realize how it will just whittle away at people's resolve. And I think it's also important to note that it'll whittle away at people's relationship to their doctors. Because if doctors keep bringing things like that up, what does that mean for your relationship? How do you see their duty of care to you? Do you really trust that they have your best interest at heart if that's not something you want to pursue? I mean, I just think assisted suicide, beyond just what it does to the individual who seeks it out, which is tragic, it undermines the whole point of the healthcare system in a way that once you open that door, it won't be closed again. And you can't introduce that kind of fear and lack of trust into a healthcare system. I mean, ultimately, you know, doctors are here to help you live and live well, in whatever way. And, you know, ultimately maybe to help you die well when that time comes. I mean, dying is a natural process, but not to hasten that death, not to bring on that death, especially because, you know, most people report things like fear of being a burden and that kind of stuff. I mean, we've come leaps and bounds with pain management at the end of life, and we can look at all of this great palliative care that's out there, but a lot of people don't realize that, and so they look with fear on what the future holds for them and make decisions that they otherwise might not have made. And I think we have to be very, very careful about it.
Yeah, what's popping up again is this system again, isn't it? It's the lack of support that people need, because if they had, you know, a better thing in place for them, then maybe they wouldn't feel so depressed, and they'd feel more supported, and they wouldn't want to think about these options or feeling more of a burden on people as well. And I think just as society, I think in general, I think if you kind of look at the past, you can see that people kind of lived, you know, their communities were a lot closer, I think, than our communities are now.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in the face of thing with social media and all that, it looks like we're all part of this one big happy community and all these different groups and stuff, and yeah, to an extent there are things like that, but I think just in terms of when you look at it, we're not as good at looking out for each other. Families aren't as big as well, and you know, you'd have several families in the street that would all look out for each other. I'm saying that as if I lived at this time. I probably didn't, but I remember when I was wee and all that, you would have closer relationships to your neighbours and things like that, and I know people still have that, but I just think with smaller families and stuff, we lack that kind of natural support, is what I'm trying to say. And then what happens is we're not getting that from higher up either. So how do we look at
imbalance?
We can make a change there.
To make sure that people are cared for.
Yeah.
I mean, and then the other way it relates to the abortion conversation, I think, is about this idea of consent, right? Autonomy and consent, because it becomes complicated. I mean, it becomes complicated with lots of things, but it becomes complicated with assisted suicide too, because often people aren't really just making the decision for themselves. They're thinking about their families and the impact that their continued life has on their families. They're thinking about money, which is a part of this that people don't like to bring up because they think it's kind of tasteless, but it will be part of the conversation for a lot of people. Is, you know, is my continued life needing all this extra care? Like, how much does that cost myself, the ones I love, the NHS, whatever else? And that is a natural part of the conversation. And then, so those things impact consent, right? Your relationship to your family, your relationship to your material belongings impact your consent. And then there's the other side of things where, you know, for many other procedures, suicidal ideation would be considered something that would discount you from being able to consent for a procedure, because you wouldn't be seen to have the capacity at that time to make the decision. And so if you're making a decision about ending your own life, it kind of fundamentally, again, gets at this idea of capacity for consent. And is that illustrative of the fact that maybe you aren't in the right head place to be making those decisions? Because for most other procedures, that would be considered to be true if you were considering ending your own life. And so it's this deeply complicated issue that was never meant to be dealt with in a healthcare space and administered by doctors or anything like that. And we all recognize tragedy in somebody taking their own life, and yet somehow we're creating exemptions to that, where we say, well, it's terrible if that person ends their life, but maybe it's not so terrible if this person does. You realize how harmful that narrative is to the dignity of the human person and to the individual. And isn't it much better to walk with people and help people bear their suffering? As Louise says, as part of community. But people are so focused on this idea of autonomy and this right to die, which I always I must say I kind of giggle at, because like It's not a right to die. We're all going to die. It's just it's
Surprise,
it's
you heard
yeah.
it.
It's not
This podcast.
it's not a right. It's an inevitability.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's an inevitability that
Yeah.
people want to control. But unfortunately, there's lots of things in life and death that are out of our
Yeah.
control. And how do we help people to integrate that a bit better and understand that better, and therefore be able to face that transition with more hope. But that's, I think, a much wider cultural conversation.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
this idea of wanting to control, and that
Yeah.
has to do with abortion and assisted suicide too.
As well.
Yeah.
Intertwined. And I think also those people who work in palliative care are probably worried as well. They don't want this to be introduced, and they don't view people as a burden. I'm sure they want to give them the best help in their last hours or the last moments of life. And I think it's a lot of people are worried about this, not just those who are sick, but those with disabilities also as well. We forgot to mention that, who are just often seen as a burden now, because and even myself when I was researching this is, so often we assume it's just the elderly or veterans, and that's shocking in itself. But also those with autism, those with depression, those with eating disorders. I was like, wow, how low are we going here with this bulimia? These are stories from Netherlands, and then I think in Belgium, I think also children can be euthanized as well. I think they're pushing for that in Canada at the moment. So this would really shock us and wake us up. What are your thoughts?
Here's a weird angle. This is going to sound a bit weird, but
Okay.
I don't think we talk about it, and dying as a natural thing. We don't talk about it enough, and I think it's sort of swept under the carpet. You know.
Totally agree.
Yeah, let's talk about
you know
that.
yourself, people don't know what to say to each other. If somebody's
It's not really a
family
normal
member-
topic though.
It's
you chat
not,
about,
but like Margaret says, it happens to everyone. So
Yeah, that's true.
why don't we talk about it more? I'm not to be morbid.
Definitely talk about it.
but-
It's our job.
It's one of the few commonalities between people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think this is a really you're hitting right on a major talking point of mine.
I'm
But
going to
I
get
think
into it now.
We're just warming up, guys. 40 minutes into it.
I must admit it's kind of a dark thing to talk about. But a
love
lot
this.
of people, when it comes to talking about assisted dying, they come to it with particular stories of having watched a loved one die and finding that experience really disturbing.
Yeah.
But it's because a lot of people aren't prepared for what death looks like in the moment. And there are elements of that for the living, for the survivors of that experience, somebody dying naturally, there's a lot of things that if you're not prepared for, you're going to be potentially disturbed by. A death rattle, that kind of stuff. And if we don't talk about what that's like, and that's actually a normal experience of death, not necessarily an indication of any pain or suffering on the part of the person dying, it's just your body going through natural processes at the end of life. People aren't prepared for that, and therefore find the experience to be deeply upsetting, and they want death to look different. They want death to look peaceful. They want death to look like a still pond. And that's just not what most people's death looks like. And that's not a bad thing. It's just people aren't prepared for that. And then you look at how some countries carry out assisted suicide, and it involves giving the person a paralytic. And so it looks much more peaceful by nature because the person can't move. But
also it's not always peaceful, like Alex Schattenberg talks about that as well. It was not always peaceful.
No.
So I used to assume, it must be a peaceful way at times, but in reality it's
we
not.
don't know. I mean, again, we can't ask the person after it's finished, so we don't know. But again, it's this process of sanitizing something that is, by its nature, complicated and hard and human, and medicalizing a process that is, by its nature, complicated and hard and human. And as Louise says, we're not prepared for it, and so therefore when we see it, it's very upsetting, and we want it to be different, and we want to have more control over it. And that's just not life. And what assisted suicide will be is a very artificial attempt at sanitizing that. And a false attempt at sanitizing that, because ultimately that is not a natural death. And what is it in Canada? Medical assistance in dying is now the 5th leading cause of death. So a huge number of people are being killed through this process. And we're just getting so disconnected from that human experience in a way
That's
that our
the thing,
culture already
it's a disconnection, isn't it? It's, it's just crazy. And it's a sweeping under the carpet of this whole thing.
Yeah.
And it's,
And again, thinking that we can make it clean and uncomplicated. It's just not how life works. And I think this relates to pro-life issues on all sides of the spectrum. Is things are, as I say, complicated and hard. And how do we change the cultural narrative to, instead of trying to eliminate the things that are complicated and difficult, instead entering into those moments with people in a way that is life-affirming and supportive and truly human. Because that's what dignity is about. I mean, this is the thing. The conversation around assisted suicide has so much conversation around dignity, and it's such a false sense of dignity, right? And it's this idea that, oh, if I were to lose my ability to walk, if I were to lose my ability to speak, if I were to be incontinent, I see that as a loss of dignity, and therefore I want to end my life. It's like, that's not, people who experience all of those things have the same dignity as you or I. They are dignified by nature of their humanity. That's not what takes their dignity away. To end somebody's life takes their dignity away. And so how do we, again, have these conversations? I think in the UK, we're very fortunate to have some really positive examples of people with disabilities speaking out against assisted suicide. So the actress Liz Carr is really outspoken on this. She's very, very good. She's got a documentary. Baroness Tanni Grey Thompson, Paralympian. She speaks pretty candidly about her experience, and she's spoken in the House of Lords about how she interprets this language of dignity, and people talking about what they think a loss of dignity would look like, because she's experienced a lot of that.
I've not seen that, so I'm going to look at it.
She's really she's excellent. And so it's one of those, you have to really you kind of just have to see that people's experiences are different, and people experience disability and illness and all sorts of things, but they have equal dignity, and they deserve to live life in the best way that they can.
And it's also, in terms of the government have recently taken away, I think, the heating payments.
The winter fuel payments.
Winter fuel payments. So if assisted suicide is pushed through, it's almost cheaper for them to kill you than to heal you, in my eyes.
I mean, people talk about pressure on the NHS, especially for older people who are no longer paying into the system the same way. And we talk about demographic changes and there being an aging population in the UK, and it's the unspoken element of the whole conversation. Nobody wants to speak those words because the thought of it is so disturbing and so utilitarian. But that's an undercurrent to all of it, is that caring for people are living longer than they ever have, and caring for people well into their 90s is expensive. And how do we accommodate for that? And there's this unspoken element that assisted suicide at least addresses some of that pressure.
Definitely. And Louise, so what can we do to stop this happening in the UK then?
Well, I believe SPUC has something on you can go on and contact your MP about it, and make your views known, because I think that if they're going to represent you, we need to let them know what it is we want. So certainly everyone that believes this is a bad thing needs to get in touch with their MP and let them know, and use that tool on the website. Can be helpful to find who that is if you don't know.
Yeah, it's going to be voted on in both Westminster and Holyrood. So if you're in Scotland, write to both your MPs and your MSPs. It could be voted on in Westminster by the end of November. So it is crunch time. This came up quickly through a private member's ballot.
Yeah, very quickly actually.
And, right at the top. So this is the Kim Ledbetter bill. And so you need to write to your MPs. As soon as possible. Well, it's really important, because we hear from MPs that they are receiving thousands of emails in support of assisted suicide. The other side has lobbied very hard on this issue for years and years, and they've been beaten back in the Parliament on a few occasions, and in both Holyrood and Westminster. But the pressure's on, and sometimes these things are a numbers game. I mean, we know that some MPs have even said, the makeup of Westminster's new, there's a whole bunch of new MPs, and a lot of them are saying, I'm going to go based on what I hear from my constituents. So tell them, write to them, use personal stories, use stories from places like Canada, where we see the ramifications of this and what happens once you open that floodgate. And make sure your voice is heard on the issue. You don't have to be that eloquent, like a couple of sentences is enough. Put it in your own words. If you have pages and pages to write about it, do. It's whatever you're able to do. Whatever you're able to do it, and do it soon, because we only have a few weeks left to make sure that we can reach people on this issue.